Good day, hello, hi. I'm your host, Izakaya K. Right here on Influ Market 101, right here on the hashtag Listen platform. We are still in Cape Town, guys. It's amazing. It's amazing. The shoots are going amazing. And I am joined by Mr. Garth Erasmus. Mr. Garth, welcome to the hashtag Listen platform. We're so happy to have you seated here with me today. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Ezekiel. I'm doing well. Thank you. It's a
Um,
beautiful day.
Yes, it is. It is a beautiful day. So, can you tell me and our viewers what is it that Garth Erasmus does
Wow,
and who he is?
that's not an easy question, but I like to use the word artist.
Yes.
So I'm an artist,
Yeah.
in the fullest sense of that word. Um, as a young person growing up, I was much more interested in doing visual art.
Okay.
But along the way, my life kind of like took a turn, and I also became a musician.
All right.
So when I say like an artist in the fullest sense of the word, that's what I mean.
Yes. Full circle. So you mentioned that you were into visual arts at the beginning. Can we go into that topic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well,
Just elaborate for me.
as a child, I was good at drawing as a child, and I was lucky. Both my parents were teachers,
Okay.
so there were always books and pages and pens and pencils in the house. In my
Yeah.
environment. And that helped me a lot because that's how I kind of like sustained this interest in drawing for a long time.
Yeah.
S- Almost into my 20s. And but I grew up during the apartheid era.
Yes.
So I'm also talking about an apartheid education system that we had to go through.
Yeah.
So there was never an opportunity in the education system to actually do any sort of art form whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so it was only when I turned 21
Okay.
that my parents bought me a painting set. I was already a student at college at that time. So for the first time in my life, I began to paint and have experience with a brush and paints and so on. And
Yeah.
I taught myself
How to
how
paint.
to paint.
Wow.
So that's how things started for me.
Yeah.
You know,
Self-taught talent.
yeah, and that I'm talking about when I was in my 20s now
Yeah.
already. So when I finished college, because I had gone to study teaching, so then I became a teacher, and I was lucky enough to become an art teacher. Um, but it was still very much the apartheid times. And so the work that I was doing was very much dedicated to making a contribution to the struggle, shall I say,
All right.
And that's how things started for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And can we speak on the role of the art in the protest of apartheid? Because I heard you speaking about apartheid, and
Yeah.
I can hear that most of the art is based on apartheid. Can we speak about that?
Well, apartheid was such a heavy thing in one's life. Maybe like the younger generation would not fully be able to understand
Yeah.
what it was like. But it really affected every aspect of one's life. So you couldn't really hide away from it. Um, and um, when I was in my 20s, and also I would say just before that, when I was 19, it was the 1976 student uprising.
Yes.
So I was a student at that time. So I also got caught up in that, and became sort of had an interest in doing like underground political work and so on and
Okay.
so on.
Yeah.
The ANC was still in exile that time, but the, within the country there was this thing that we everybody had to make a contribution to this struggle.
Yes.
That was the atmosphere of the time. And so I was confronted with that very same question myself, and I had to make a decision. And because I was good at art, I sort of came to the conclusion that maybe my contribution could be in a cultural sense.
Yeah.
So I began to do the work that I did was very much of a political nature, expressing feelings and emotions about what was going on, the way I saw it, and the way I experienced it, and that was very much the very typical of my life for a long time. Deep into my 20s and into my 30s, doing very, very much political work in the service of the community and in the service of a society that's struggling for freedom.
Yeah, definitely. And are you still trying incorporating the information that of back then in today's life to educate the youth like us through your art?
Well, yeah, I think if I look at myself, and I look at myself, when I look at myself as a young man, I was so much influenced by that political situation at that time that I've never really escaped those same sort of thoughts and feelings about what must be the function of art in society. I still feel that I need to make a contribution to my community.
Yeah.
I still feel that there are important messages to be conveyed. So in that sense, that influence from that political era has never really left me.
Yeah.
I still have those same urges,
Yeah.
even though the times are different, even though I'm a mature person now, I still have those that urge to do that kind of or to be that kind of artist.
Yeah. Because it was your backbone, and that's
Exactly.
that's how you started.
Exactly. You
and
can't
it is
escape
your blueprint.
Exactly. You
started
can't
by-
escape it,
Yeah, you can never
Mm-hmm.
escape it. So you often draw work from the Khoisan heritage.
Mm-hmm.
So can we also dwell on that?
Well, that's a good example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
About dealing with issues that are important in the society.
Yes.
In a way, it's still politics.
Yeah.
But I think that because our country has changed now, it is a different kind of approach to politics. One of the things, maybe I should explain how all this came about in my life. So even though I live in Cape Town and I work in Cape Town right now, I'm not originally from Cape Town. I'm from the Eastern Cape.
Okay.
I was born in Uitenhage.
Yeah.
And grew up in Port Elizabeth.
Okay.
So, and I also studied there, did my schooling there. So I found myself in Cape Town in the early 80s, one of those people coming to the big city to look for work opportunities and so on, very typical.
Yeah.
But what never left me was my experience of coming from the Eastern Cape. I found that in the big city, Cape Town, people didn't have the same upbringing as one has from growing up in the countryside, And this never left me, that I was always inquisitive about that. And I always took that as something that set me apart, being in the big city. Even though I'm in the big city, I still felt I come from the countryside. I've still got those, that emotional expressions, those emotional experiences of growing up like that. So, in other words, I had a lot of questions about myself.
Yeah.
Because
Heritage.
of seeing myself as an outsider here. And one of those things is this aspect of where did you come from? What is your history? Those kind of questions. And I always had this at the back of my mind that I wanted to do something about it. But we weren't really properly equipped to deal with this because, as I say, our education system was still very much in that apartheid mode, right? And our education system kept us ignorant about these aspects of our history that I was interested in. So, to be specific, it was 1985, and it was during the state of emergency in South Africa, where everything was closed down. It was like a lockdown.
Okay.
And I was already a teacher that time, but all schools and educational system institutions were closed down. And it was during the state of emergency, because everything was locked down, that I thought, I'm going to start trying to answer these questions about heritage that had been like at the back of my mind all the time. And during that time, I went visiting the Cape Town Natural History and Social History Museum in the Gardens, which is a big museum. And it's a very, very, very good museum. So I visited that museum for the first time. And going through the museum, I came across the section that dealt with Khoisan history. And everything was like a revelation for me, because I realized at that point how ignorant the education system had kept us. And that was a moment of revelation for me. Because for the first time, I was reading things about this history that was revealed to me for the first time. And one of the things that I saw in the museum, in the Khoisan section, was the section on music. And what was on display was a lot of the collected Khoisan musical instruments. And they were fascinating to look at, fascinating to see. A true revelation in my mind, It affected me from an artistic point of view because it made me realize that it made me ask certain very personal questions about myself as an artist. One of those is, what kind of artist do you want to be? Right? What is the function of the artist in society? And what role does art play in one's emotional life? Right? These are the questions. And these were important questions for me as a guy, because at that particular point, I had been doing political work, anti-apartheid work in my artwork for such a long time that I had reached a point of like complete saturation. And I was actually tired of it because I realized that doing political work that has a political content did not satisfy me emotionally. I felt that I could be a different kind of artist. I needed to be an artist that, if I could say, an artist that found his own voice. Somebody who is unique and somebody whose approach can be instantly recognizable. I think these are the kinds of things that an artist actually, it's an eternal quest. But you always want to be a unique artist that everybody can just instantly recognize,
By just looking at your work and then they'll see this is Mr. Garth's work. You must have your own unique style. And I spoke to an artist in a previous interview, and she said, like, you need to find yourself. And then you will be able to know what you want to do with your paintings. And it will speak to, if your painting doesn't speak to you, then it won't speak to the people. It won't speak to others, So firstly, it must speak to you. So how do you feel about the impact of the Khoisan history
Well,
in present day?
yeah. Well, it had a huge impact on my life because remember I was telling you I had reached this point of being tired of political
Yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah.
So I asked myself, what could I do now to take my work forward? And having seen the musical instruments, having seen what they're made of, the simplicity and the beauty of it, but really actually the simplicity of it, it inspired me to want to move away from painting that I'd been doing up
Yeah.
until that point, and I wanted to do three-dimensional work, like sculptural work, And I was very much influenced by the shapes and the forms of the musical instruments.
Okay.
And so I went home actually determined to actually forget about painting now. I
And do
wanted
sculpting.
yeah. I wanted to reinvent myself.
Yeah.
And sculpture was going to be my choice. So I actually started.
With the sculpting.
Yeah, I started.
Yeah.
I started like making work that was influenced by what I had seen. Most of the instruments that I'm talking about, the Khoisan stuff in the museum, are like really simple materials, branches from trees,
Okay.
and so on. Simple ropes and twines and so on. So I started working on my first kind of ideas about sculpture. But as I was doing this, under inspiration of the musical instruments, I discovered the music.
Wow.
I discovered the sounds. Because the museum itself was like a really typical old apartheid kind of museum. There was no sounds you could listen to. If you saw musical instruments, it was just the musical instrument in a glass box,
Yeah,
and that was
with
it.
no sound.
Yeah, you had no idea what
What it
sounded
sounds like, yeah.
So what happened to me was I discovered the sound, and that was the biggest changing point in my life. Because the sculpture that I'm talking about that I wanted to do never happened.
Wow.
I discovered the music and I started making musical instruments and started playing music and started to be a different kind of artist that worked with sound. Right?
Yeah.
And this is how that impact was in my
On your
life.
life.
That's on the one hand.
Okay.
But on the other hand, discovering the history of the Khoisan was something that was new in the 19. Maybe you can't imagine the 1980s, but there was no such thing about, there was no such thing talking about Khoisan, indigenous this or that, nothing. So one was working in a complete vacuum. I had to really, because I was even alone, I had to really discover for myself what it is about this history that was so interesting. But it was interesting enough for me to understand that if I, as an ordinary person, as an ordinary South African, was ignorant about this history, then it means everybody was the same as me.
Exactly.
Everybody was ignorant about this, and I took that as a form of power, because I felt like almost with the apartheid political work that I was talking about.
Yes.
I felt that this could be my new voice now. I could spread this message about this history that we've been ignorant about, and sort of make an effort of uplifting the community and the society related to this particular history,
Yeah.
Besides the fact that this history was completely related to my own ancestry, so that was very important and interesting for me personally on one level as well. But on the other level, exposing this knowledge to the society was my biggest effort that I wanted to do.
The main aim. And can we go dwell to another point? The Muse 3.
The Muse.
Yeah. When I did my research, I read about the Muse 3 about
Okay.
1995.
All right.
Can we talk about that? Mark Diamanto called your painting the Muse 3.
Okay.
How did
Wow.
that happen? Can we go on that
Right.
journey?
So we're going to talk about the muse now.
Yeah.
All right. But the muse, look, I have to tell you, the muse, um, as a work, even though I did it round about 1993, 94, 95,
95.
yeah, usually you would put the um, the date on
Yeah.
to a work when it's eventually finished.
Yeah.
But the work came from a long time before that.
Wow.
You know? I would say that the work actually started, the ideas for the work started actually around about 1989. Went into 1990, 91, 92. Now, I have to bring you constantly, because we're dealing with these dates, I have to bring you constantly back to the South Africa of that time. It was a heavy, heavy time, brother. And one of the things that you should remember about, say, 1991 was that Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and then the country began to change, right? And one of those things that was happening was there was a strange thing happening politically. There was this thing that the media called black on black violence.
Okay.
Yeah, there was like an unusual kind of phenomenon happening where black people were attacking and fighting with more radical black people. You know,
Okay.
You should understand that the changes, because Nelson Mandela had been released, the changes that were happening a bit too fast for some people.
Okay.
They couldn't take it, right? So you have to understand that there was a lot of fear, inherent in that time. And so this work came out of trying to create an artwork that encapsulated this atmosphere in the country.
Okay.
So the work itself consists of two faces in profile from the side, looking at one another, right? But actually, if you actually see the actual work, it's one face. So if you, in artistic terms,
Yeah.
I should maybe try and let you imagine this.
Okay.
If I drew a side profile drawing of a person with a nose like that, and another person there, also with a nose, and their noses touch, right? It on the one hand, it'll look like two faces looking at one another. But the work is constructed and composed in such a way that I took one face and cut it in two to create this profile of two people. So the muse just means to look at, to concentrate, to think about. The muse comes from the gaze that these two profile figures have of just looking at one another like that. And this was my image to encapsulate the atmosphere that was happening in South Africa, about the conflict happening between brothers, you could say, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, and is this exhibition in the National Museum of Africa Arts?
Yeah, this is in the Smithsonian Museum of
Yes.
African Art in Washington.
How did that happen?
Well, I could never... The date is 1995 for the work.
1995,
right.
yeah.
So remember now, South Africa had the freedom elections in 1994. So South Africa became an open country, an open society. And internationally, South Africa was like just the talking point of the world. You know, everybody was inquisitive about this country that achieved its freedom now for the first time. So, in other words, it's almost like South Africa had been in the dark ages, in the dark before, but now it was open. So one of those things was like overseas art curators came to South Africa with the idea of coming to look at the kind of artwork that was done during the, I would say, the lockdown
Yeah.
of apartheid. They were inquisitive about what artworks were there, you know. And I met one of these curators, specifically a one from the Smithsonian Museum, who came to visit me, came to my studio, looked at the work, saw the muse, and saw other works as well, and purchased them for the museum.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
It's like magic. It worked like magic.
Yeah, it really worked like magic. What would you like to tell up and coming artists that is in the art industry?
Wow. Okay, that's a loaded question. But look here, just coming, I simply have to talk from experience.
Yes,
here.
yes.
Nothing is easy. Nothing does. Nothing comes easily to one. You have to work hard. You have to be very dedicated to your craft. You have to be aware of your skill, and you have to be aware of your skill to such a point that you have to realize that you have to dedicate yourself to the improvement of your skill. So this is very much, the art journey is very much a journey that is personal and almost private in a way. But there's a struggle that you have within yourself to achieve the kind of dreams that you want to through your artwork. But these dreams will never materialize unless you give your art and unless you really hone your skills by delving deeply into them, you know?
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the message to the up and coming artists.
You will find your voice eventually.
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 Mr. Erasmus, we've come to the end.
Hezekiah, the time went too quick, man.
We've come to the end of our
Gee
interview.
whiz.
Yeah, it went by very fast. I want to thank you for joining us and giving us a glimpse of history.
Thank you very
And giving us a glimpse of the Khoisan history. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And I think it was very educational, and our viewers would enjoy this one and learning about our history of South Africa. Mr. Erasmus, I want to thank you again for joining me on Influ Market 101. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, man.
It's a pleasure.
Cheers.
And that's right, guys. We have come to the end of yet another episode right here in Cape Town. # Listen Influ Market 101. Do not forget to like, follow, and subscribe to all our social media platforms. I am your host, Hezekiah K, signing out.